Sure. Yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah.
But I want this to be, and the intent behind this is, I mean, there's all of that parts to you where you're always working. However, there are also parts to you that people don't know, and the efforts that have gone into not just building your business, but also continually running it and raising. So I want to just talk about that process and how you were able to start and get to where you are today. I know it's a loaded question, but I'm sure you can do it.
No, 100%. So should I start with, I guess, some background on myself and then carrying that into starting Alvin? All right. So some of this, I suppose, will be redundant for yourself, but for the viewers, I'm actually originally from Chicago, Illinois, born and raised. I, however, though, at this point have been in the African continent for a little bit over 7 years now. So at first, actually, I was on your side of the table. I had helped to start an investment fund in Morocco, and it was in Casablanca for about 2 years. And then I spent a bit of time in Nigeria, worked at PaySec for a little bit. Then I've now been in Kenya for, I actually can't, it's hard for me to believe, but yeah, at this point, a bit over 4 years now. So about half of that time has been spent building Alvin. And the origin story for Alvin came actually from a personal problem that I noticed was not actually so personal. In other words, it was a problem that I noticed in my personal life, but I realized actually there were millions of people, not just in actually Kenya and Nigeria, which are the two markets that we as a company at Alvin are initially focused on, but really actually globally too. It's quite a significant issue. And that was in the very beginning where I just found it way too manual to figure out how to, on an ongoing basis, balance my daily spending with respect to my personal financial goals. In my particular case, I was most interested in, and still to this day, this is still the case, interested in acquiring real estate. And I realized at the time that, like I said, that this wasn't just an issue that was germane to my personal life, but also there were millions of folks who were also experiencing it. And also, most importantly, and this is like putting my, I guess, like former VC hat back on, former product manager hat on, I realized that there was a massive, there were millions actually at scale, billions of dollars in revenue that were left on the table on the part of big institutions, i.e. banks, asset managers, and so forth, that weren't really doing that much to cultivate more valuable customers across their retail customer base. So that was the spark of an idea that started the business. And this was early 2021 at the outset. From there, though, I then went to the two best guys from the company I was last at here in Kenya. I was like, hey, I'm looking to solve this problem. I think it's going to be quite important and also quite lucrative. And fortunately, they were really excited to join. And this was around May of 2021 is when we really got started with this whole idea of Alvin. From May, though, through to the closing of our first round, led by yours truly, there was just a lot of movement that happened, right? So at the very beginning, our core focus was to, sorry, did you say something?
I was like, you gotta say it, you gotta say it, you gotta say it.
Oh,
It was led by,
led
led
by,
by.
yes, led by the notorious Maya and Aggressive Capital and the wonderful team there. Yes. So, but that's the thing actually, before even being connected to Ingressive, there were a few different things that we really needed to get right before we were properly ready for that conversation. So, coming, I guess, back to the subject of this talk right now, or otherwise this discussion of how to get funded. The truth of the matter actually is that at the very beginning, there was no venture capital, there was no angel funding, there was no outside funding whatsoever. Actually, at the very beginning. So, like I said, at the very start of 2021, I just got to the point where I was just so personally convicted around the importance of solving this problem, and that I was ultimately going to be competent enough to figure it out. I first started off by liquidating personal investment positions, my savings, crypto positions, and so forth, in order to not just finance my own life, living out here in Nairobi, and then also to pay in cash for my two first employees, for a head of product design and also for a head of engineering. And it was kind of, it's somewhat of a digression, but I do think it kind of speaks to the importance of like this concept of like, put your money where your mouth is. And if you really believe that what you're going to do is going to work, then you should be investing in it. I was kind of forced into kind of launching into the next phase because one of these two guys that came to me and basically said, because we had kind of, he had learned about this idea that I was doing. We had started working lightly on it. It was just like ideating the whole project. But I I hadn't like started full-time just yet. And he had asked me, he's like, Winston, I need to know, is this whole Alvin thing going to be serious? Because this other company, which I won't name, but at the time we thought that they were going to be like a core competitor of ours, had just approached him with an offer that he had to revert back to them on. And he's like, I have, you know, family obligations, et cetera. I need to know, like, is this thing legit? And so it was kind of like it was a, you know, gun to your head moment. Like, how much do you believe in yourself, basically? And I pulled the triggers. Like, I'll figure it out. I'll figure out how to raise money. I'll figure out how to monetize the whole initiative. And so, you know, that's led us to where we are today. So, at first, like I said, you know, I had liquidated my, you know, personal investments and so forth in order to begin the project. But then in order to subsidize that, and this is something that I really think is an option that I think a lot of early founders can consider. I found a consulting opportunity in the UK where I was able to be paid in pounds while giving them like part-time product management work from Nairobi, right? So my life was generally, I mean, I have some obligations in the US in dollars, of course, but my life day to day in Nairobi was denominated in shillings, right? But then I was able to earn in pounds. So I was able to, you know, subsidize like my disbursement of personal funds in order to continue the project using that capital. So that went from, I guess, like total just Winston bootstrapping to subsidized bootstrapping. And then from there was from there was the first time when we started looking at like what would raising capital look like for our project. So like I mentioned, I had started my career in Africa through venture capital. So I'd first gone to just folks who I'd met through that chapter and got different responses from, you know, yeah, we know you, Winston, we've seen the quality of your work. We trust you. We want to see a bit more of like what you're trying to flesh out, because there's a rather novel concept, you know, building this like this type of apparatus before at the beginning for the asset management industry. And then on top of that, there were some firms that didn't actually have more capital to deploy and so forth. So I realized, well, okay, like I actually won't be able to finance this thing just based upon my initial network. And then actually, by the way, includes Ingressive. You know, Ingressive came from outside my initial network at the beginning. So we then went back to the drawing board, and I realized, wait a second, though, the difference between when Winston's like personal funds are going to expire, even if I spend every single last dollar that I had on getting this thing moving, and whenever we would be able to build a company that was fully profitable. I mean, it takes years to do that. So by definition, there were years in between both of those points. So that at that point, we then first raised a friends and family round. And then our focus was just like building product as quickly as possible, you know, just like speed, and also getting validation points in terms of signal from the market. So once we were at the point where we were able to zero in on this one particular contract with this especially large regional asset manager, and then also the CEO of Paystack, you know, my former employer, had committed a ticket. We were able to kind of really accelerate the proper pre-seed round. But the truth of the matter is, we initially got some feedback back from the VC space, like from the broader investment space. Realized we were going to have to do more work. Paused. Realized we only had maybe 3-4 months at that point. Raised a small friends and family, and then really waited until we had everything that we needed in order to get, you know, a proper, what we thought was a fair valuation for the company, and then also be able to move faster with the round, such that we were able to close it in about 6 to 8 weeks, and then we announced our pre-seed round in the beginning of last year, beginning of 2022.
Thank you so much. That was such an extensive explanation, and I don't think any question I could have asked would have brought any of that out for me. However, I'm going to ask you, when you said you had to do more work, you figured out you had to do more work. What does that mean? And that's a very introspective place to be, as opposed to we need to send this out. So what does that mean, and how did you handle that without feeling like, you know what, like, well,
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you say the very last part again?
I'm not saying, oh, you know what, I give up. You know, you just said, I have to do more work. You went back, you did more work, and then you eventually announced. What was it like? Your internet is a bit bad. It's fine.
So I'll answer those, I think, in reverse order real quick. So first, I suppose you could say it's just maybe like the family that I come from, just the desire that I have within me that I think it's healthy that people who want to do ambitious things like have something that they have to prove to the world, and that would be the category that I would consider myself under. But there was no, I mean, even in the darkest beginning days, because it actually turned out that this company, excuse me, this company in the UK was having some issues, and they turned out to be much more severe than I had initially understood. There was never a moment where I ever considered, like, even for like there was never an iota of a possibility that I would give up on it. And I think that actually, frankly, especially in today's climate right now, with like the economic downturn, is something that I really like think is important to emphasize for younger founders. It's not just like have resilience. Like, sure, every entrepreneur knows that, but the importance of knowing to expect for it to be hard, and then to accept this is what hard feels like, right? And the reason why, I mean, sure, like one could say like there aren't so many financial there aren't so many capitalization opportunities for early companies in Africa and so forth. I totally get that, but I also think in a lot of endeavors in life, the reason why a lot of people may not succeed is because they mentally check out, or they mentally give up. So those who insist on being, I'm going to be just as consistent. I'm going to be here again today, again tomorrow, and so forth. You can kind of create, or otherwise increase the likelihood of your own success that way. To the first part of your question, to be very frank, and I would say this even if I wasn't on the phone with one of my own investors, I think it's very fair that investors require concrete validation, and not just hype story and like conveying of emotion from founders. I mean, the reality is, and I think a lot of founders, just in speaking to especially earlier ones who are starting their journey, sometimes forget that investors also have bosses. Like the investors who invest in us have their own financial responsibilities to those who are expecting a return over a certain period of time. And if an investor can't deliver on that, then in the same way that a CEO can be fired from the company for not performing, an investor can be fired from a broader portfolio, right? So the things I was being asked for, I found very fair, and also were things that we wanted to get ourselves anyway. Of course, it would have been, I mean, it's always easier if you don't need as much evidence in order to secure the capital and fair terms. But I mean, what I was being asked for was reasonable. So that was things like assembling a deeper team that had industry expertise relevant to the problem that we were solving. Also locking in advisors that were literally coming out of the retail banking industry, both in the US, frankly, perhaps just as like a best practice reference perspective, but then also from Latin America. And in my view, I think the closest market globally to a lot of the mechanics of Africa. And then, of course, from Africa itself. And then on top of that, having some first contracts that were signed. Now, that said, something that I just in thinking in preparation for this discussion, something that I think a lot of companies don't realize is that there are other forms of traction as well. Something that we realized was like just showing active usership numbers on our beta testing app in Kenya, and then showing not only usership, but also just some early testimonies of how people have found their experience using our products. One, I mean, that's one example. A second one is demonstrating through demoable prototypes over very quick periods of time your capability, your competence in building a very effective product. So being able to say, okay, we spoke how long ago? 4 weeks ago. Now we're here. This is the product that we now have. We didn't have these features last time we spoke. We now have them. They're deployed. They're working. People are enjoying them, right? Being able to have a wait list, which we didn't really find the need for that, because we built the product. We built the initial app rather quickly and deployed it. And then even frankly, like especially on the B2B side, showing snapshots. I mean, you want to be careful, of course, to ensure that you're maintaining trust with customers, with like the broader market, but just like showing snapshots of emails, of showing like explicit interest, and not just interest conceptually, but also interest to purchase once a particular, say, feature was built for enterprise, from like executives from well-known, in our case, banks. So as we gathered a lot more of that evidence, and then in particular showed the competence in terms of like just being very careful to not have errors in like emails, being very quick with email responses, and ensuring that investors who we started a conversation with, but who perhaps didn't actually commit to the investment until maybe like a month later, or even later than that, saw very consistent performance and like professionalism from myself and my team.
And I think it also goes to build integrity, because then the investors also look at you like, you don't have to sell romanticized idea. of what I expect. You are telling me because you intentionally want me to see that you're building an actual business that has
Right.
grit.
Right.
And it also makes me feel comfortable. If you tell me I want X amount of money to do X amount of thing, I know that you're actually going to do it because you're not necessarily just trying to build for beauty's sake, you're actually building to build with grit. And which brings me to the next question. Point, can you tell the difference when an investor is being derogatory? Because there are some of them that have think pieces and thoughts. And an investor that is genuinely interested in you and wants to see you grow. What point, and if there ever was a time, how did you handle it?
It's a great question. So I was thinking a couple of notes to make sure I share a comprehensive answer. So a couple of things immediately come to mind as you're asking that. So the first one is good investors, and I believe this very firmly. Good investors will, well, let me also be careful at the same time. So good investors that I suppose especially also are not accelerators. I should be careful about that distinction. But good investors will make bets on individual players in key markets or otherwise key niches. So in our case, like we are, and so far we're the leader in our space, which is also a rather new one in the retail banking industry. Alvin is a leader of the kinds of products that we're providing. But like as we're speaking to investors, it's pretty easy to see are there like corollary companies to ours that are already in your portfolio that could suggest at least that investor is really just fishing for information to then relay back to, because you're not signing NDAs, right? So they can gather information from us, perhaps like very sensitive like business secrets as far as what our plans are, then just share that with a competitor. That's one way that you can kind of scope that out. And I'd always do extensive research on every single VC that we spoke to. Every single angel as well. What's their reputation? Are they earnest players? Do they are they considered being founder friendly while also being like serious supporters? To kind of perhaps give constructive guidance if the founder if they think is astray. And secondly, something that I noticed was that the types of questions are different between investors that might be very keen, as I guess all investors really should be, on challenging you on your claims, but also really want to see how your solution could succeed. So, for example, I mean, I think it was funny thinking about the main call that I had with Ingressive, where I believe you were on it actually, right, Vanessa? Oh, you're mute. Yeah.
No, actually, I don't. We actually had a follow-on conversation to talk about branding and communication and marketing after
Okay.
you come on board.
There you go. Okay,
And then
sure.
we had a very extensive conversation about that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So that I do remember, because that was a one-on-one as well. And also our cameras are on. But I remember in that main call with a number of stakeholders within Ingressive, everyone's cameras were off. And I in general, like even if cameras were off, I always try to have my camera on to just allow people to see my conviction around what I'm saying. But I remember in that particular call, I actually thought the call didn't go so explosively well. In fact, even afterward, I mean, because I would score every single call that I did, and then would evaluate like the deck like every single time, just kind of going through that iteration process. And didn't think it went so great. But I remember I guess a former member of Ingressive, I think it was within like 2 or 3 days or so, reverted back with the commitment of Ingressive's taken with like a lot of momentum, and it was clear. But then I remember thinking back on that conversation as an after, and especially even in preparation for this discussion with you, the kinds of questions that folks at Ingressive were asking I do remember them being very explicitly in the direction of, have you thought about this challenge to get to this vision that you're describing? Which I think is a very different flavor of a question than just actually, and actually that's the point, is that that's a very different flavor of a remark than just the statement of, oh, this isn't going to work because of this X, Y, and Z. I don't want to suggest that there are categorically good and bad investors in this regard necessarily, but But I do think that investors, even just from seeing your website, just seeing like one sentence about your company is already going to have certain biases around whether your kind of solution should work if you do it correctly or if it shouldn't. And they just kind of want to make sure that they're not missing out, but they otherwise aren't all that serious about, say, betting on the retail banking industry in Nigeria, or in, say, Nigeria as a country, or in Kenya as a country, right? But you can only really know that until you get on the phone with them, insofar that they don't have another company in their portfolio already that is in your kind of tertiary space. So those two things I would say are the key points for me. The first one being, is there someone who could be doing something similar enough to what we're doing, and they just want to, and then this person just wants to fish for information to relay it back on, but then otherwise probably ghost or just say, no, it's not for us. And then the second piece is, are they asking questions to see actually how could this work? And then also a big one too that I noticed was which I really loved. I mean, I know we're supposed to say, oh, fundraising is necessarily bad, but I really actually enjoyed a lot of the calls that I had with investors, frankly, like Ingressive, where pretty immediately, even if there were certain challenging questions that I didn't always know the answer to when I was being asked the question, you could just tell it the spirit was based on, like, I want you to succeed, and I'm just curious what you think about this, and then giving suggestions like, oh, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that, et cetera. And those are just pleasurable humans to talk to. So yeah, that's what I would say in that regard.
I mean, there might be the thought that, okay, we're having this conversation, there might be a bias to me saying this, but honestly, I think it's not really a thing that if you think too much, you cannot see, which is there's a doggedness that you can tell that that people can tell that you have. And that doggedness is something that, again, it's not everyone that has to feel like they have to feel that way for them to survive or succeed. Because they're now, oh my gosh, Winston is so passionate and this, and I don't like to talk because I'm a shy person. Does that now mean I cannot do it as well? Now, those type of people, and the reason I had to say all of that was to give context, or is to give context to the fact that not everyone is going to sound like you. Not everyone is going to be so articulate. Not everyone is going to be so understanding. So if you are a founder that finds yourself in that situation, constantly overthinks, or just even feels like maybe they don't have the capacity to do it, because again, we're going back to the conversation of potentially that person might be willing to give up. What is your least Winston thing to do for that person to survive? Because then you're going to give advice based off of what you would do. However, what is the least Winston thing to do, but they'll still be able to survive?
Well, first off, I just want to note, I love that my name has now become an adjective, which I really appreciate. But yeah, it's a very interesting question. And first off, let me just say, I mean, I definitely get nervous too. I mean, I was a bit nervous even for this discussion here, knowing it was going to be recorded and shared with folks who were looking to get value out of things that I would have to share. So and the point within that point that I think is really important is that I think a lot of people, including myself, like sometimes we belittle, how do I say this? We automatically discount, or we don't always know to challenge our discounting of our own capabilities based upon false assumptions. And the false assumption here, I think that a lot of people have, again, including myself, is that, oh, when I see someone who appears to present themselves well, they just must find that to be super, super easy. I mean, I still get shy, sometimes at parties and so forth, and that's a lot of people actually I realized who I admire, guys like David Goggins, Alex Ramosi, and so forth. So I first just want to say that, like I'm not actually that much different, I think, than most people. The second piece, though, is, and I want to respect, I think, the spirit of your question, but I also want to answer it in a way that I think is ultimately most correct, and that is, I think the way to think about it is whenever any person is confronted with an option where I can, I don't feel like I have the skills yet to excel at a particular thing. But if I don't try, then I necessarily will fail. The question I think is important to think about is which which is more important to you between two possibilities. Possibility A, you do it, it may not be as good as you think you would want to do it, and perhaps you might have to have some like nights of beating yourself up and not being able to sleep because damn, I really screwed up that question, in that investor call. But I needed to fundraise, so I tried anyway. Like between that possibility, or just not trying at all, and then living forever with the certainty that you will not grow in that area. To kind of highlight that, I mean, when I was, yeah, I'm very grateful that our original goal for like the formal pre-seed was 400K. But the truth is, at the very beginning, man, I never raised money before, and I didn't want to be embarrassed by not being able to exceed whatever goal that I'd set. I'd heard of so many people saying, I mean, just really oftentimes like negative things, saying, oh, you'll be lucky if you could raise 50K for anything in fintech now. The money for that is dry. Kenyans and Nigerians saying, oh, no one's, even if you provide exceptional data-driven software to ensure that Vanessa is able to see, okay, if she wants to say spend a little bit more on coffee, like that's how this, like that extra expenditure above her budget is likely affecting her savings goal. Like, no, I would hear from Nigerians and Kenyans saying no Nigerian man or a Kenyan man in particular, was men who are being accused of this, like they're not going to change their behavior, even if you show them plots of land that they can afford if they stay on track. So I was like, man, okay, well, I gotta try anyway, because this problem is just so important. I can't think of any other type of campaign that I would want to spend my life doing for this chapter of my life, and including like the next 10 years, other than this problem of helping people, namely Black folks right now. I mean, helping folks who should be able to afford assets that generate wealth, namely land, but are not able to because they don't always have like the financial know-how. Like it was like helping them to achieve those goals using data and really beautiful software. Like that was just so important. I had to try. So ultimately, coming back to your original question, I think any entrepreneur who feels like, man, I don't know if I have whatever skill. I think generally speaking, the consequence of not trying is always going to burn more than getting up there and perhaps stuttering, or not always being so eloquent, but at least you have your presentation out there. The other thing too I would share is it's okay to play to a person's strengths. So if a person in general prefers to write clearly, or to show a working demo, right? Say anyway, I've met and worked with however many shy engineers, but they're exceptional. They never wanted to talk, but they were just like really competent at engineering. Like if instead of say pitching whole bunch of investors, say a founder were to prefer to just put a demo up on a website, and then figure out a way to like really lean into but look at what I can build. That also is okay. So it's okay to kind of figure out, okay, what am I best at, and then build up the other skills from there. But the reality is, if someone wants to do something important at different levels, then there are certain skills which you're just going to have to decide. I'm willing to be bad at this thing publicly because this thing that I ultimately want is more important than that fear, as opposed to just not trying. Does that make sense?
Of course. And I've learned that apparently, they said that, I'm just saying what they said. Apparently, if you think it made sense, don't ask questions like, does that make sense? So, yeah.
I'm still learning
But
too.
I was kidding. I think just to wrap this up, because I mean, I probably think maybe another like couple of months, I might come back and do another version. But just to wrap this up, one good question I think every founder, business owner, even people that go to 9 to 5 should ask themselves is, do I feed within myself enough as much as I'm trying to feed externally? That means, do you take time to rest and relax as much as you're constantly struggling to make it? And I obviously find that it's not a thing. Now, I cannot assume that it's the same for you. I was only setting the premise of what I am familiar with. Now, on your end, Is this something that you also struggle with? And if it's not, what do you think people can do, or founders, people who are working 9 to 5 can do to make their life less stressful, especially when you're dealing with the externals or regulations and then it's beyond your control? Um, how do you still find some time to R&R?
Hmm. I've noticed this is a very important theme within your firm in the time that I've known you guys, which I really love and admire and respect. Let me first say that. Secondly, um, so the truth is, I'm not fully at where I want to be personally. I'll just admit that in terms of really having a good. Well, here's the truth. So I really actually I espouse the idea that um, work-life balance can be appreciated as a concept at a more macro level, as opposed to just always being assumed that it's micro, which I think often when that term is used in common discussion, it's associated with like micro work-life balance, like as in like day to day, or even hour to hour. This whole idea of work for 50 minutes, take a break for 10. So that's super micro. In my orientation, I think it's really appropriate. I think it's very fair to take like a more like beginning to end of life perspective. And I think it's appropriate, just in my personal view, for people to identify, okay, this chapter is when I really have to bust my ass. Like I remember, when I was raising our pre-seed one round, and I had a roommate who, he was more into like the entertainment side of things in Nairobi. And like I said, I just liquidated all these funds that I saved over however long, and I just wasn't. So yeah, I was gonna be at home regularly on Fridays and Saturdays. And I had friends. Most of my friends actually all my friends were kind of like employed at really cool places and had the funds to do kind of whatever they were doing, and we're getting a paycheck every other week. I hadn't gotten a
Oh
paycheck.
no, Winston, your internet is not great.
Ooh, sorry. Is it stable now? Vanessa, can you hear me? Uh, I'm sorry. Can you hear
Your
me now?
internet, no, your internet just went off. You literally were not, I could not hear anything.
Oh shoot.
So no,
Um,
but I was at the place where you had a roommate. So yeah.
so I had a roommate. He's a very serious guy. He's a founder actually too now. Again, he was a founder before, but he was just. But my point was just that I had a roommate who kind of was more consistently doing things that people, young professionals do on the weekends, and would consistently see me, late night on Friday, all day Saturday, and so forth. Just really making sure that I was at the time. Like the problem was, my background is in product management, right? So I was, and there were three of us. So I was managing the product development process and engagement with early users, so forth. And then at the same time was figuring out how to fundraise for the first time in my life, right? And I remember, there would be moments where I would just be asked by people like, why are you doing this? Like you have to go, you have to balance that out. And the reality is, I think it was very appropriate that the reality was like I did not know how to do this whole process efficiently. Actually, to tell you the truth, Vanessa, I was looking at our DocSend account before this call, and the version of the deck. Actually, that's the thing too. There were like 2 or 3 versions that we went through. The version of the deck that we really raised like a proper pre-seed round on, I went through 69 iterations of 69 times of going back, modifying something. Oh, this investor said, even if they're not, even if I think they're not likely to invest, they said this particular slide, say on your TAM, your total addressable market, didn't make enough sense to me, or the equation of how you're thinking, or like there weren't enough specific studies to things that you claimed within the call. It's every single time. I didn't want to do it most of the time, but every single time I would go back, reevaluate it, see if I could find other stats. And I was by myself doing this, in terms of like focusing on the capital raise process. And so I think it was very appropriate then that my life was fully all consumed with very little, if any, rest. Because if the thing wasn't going to work because I wasn't going to be able to raise money for it, then the reason was not going to be because I didn't bust my ass hard enough. So in that particular chapter, maybe actually then that's the thing. It was kind of like the full year as far as thinking about like fundraising, what would be required for it, and then making sure that that happened without any kind of excuse. And so now, we're fortunately at in a time where we're still well capitalized, and the company is at a good footing. But I am able to kind of balance a bit more. What exactly do I need to do for the next milestone? For the next contract, for rollouts, et cetera. Like, I'm able to kind of focus that and siphon that off, because I bought us some time to figure it out, figure out the next step. So I realized that was not probably like directly to the question that you're asking, but I do think it's fair. Like, if people are thinking, you ask about people who are working 9 to 5s and considering, oh, do I do this or not do it? The reality is, if you're going to win, especially in a market like Nigeria, there's so many competent. I mean, this is the case, in Kenya too. I've seen so many competent, hardworking Kenyans as well. But Nigeria as a country is 2/3 of the population of the U.S., and there are just a lot. I mean, in the tech space, from my experience in working at Paycheck and just seeing the competence there, I mean, like, if you're really serious about trying to build something and then ensure that your solution wins, you have to be willing to work in a way that other people aren't willing to, in order to be one of the few that win. So the other thing I would say is, motorcycles are fantastic. I don't know what the motorcycle culture is in Nigeria, but I personally find that very helpful as a balance, if you will. Just putting your helmet on and going out for a ride. So that also helps. I don't know if that's helpful feedback for anyone, but I do encourage that. And then yeah, actually, the last point. I'm sorry, I've been on this for a minute, but just to make sure that the answer is comprehensive. I also think there's a lot of virtue, just to emphasize one thing I was saying earlier, there's a lot of virtue in the idea of identifying, okay, what actually exactly do I need to do for this period? Because otherwise, the whole roadmap to become like the next Paystack exit can just feel completely overwhelming. Should I need to do it? It's like, what you actually need for the next step is actually probably much, much, much simpler. It's probably, you need two additional contracts, or you need this many users, or you need to focus on this one marketing campaign that can take you from here to here. And then you'll actually have the last pillar that you need, say, for your next round. Just focus on that. And I think adopting that kind of mental model can, I mean, at least for me, it significantly helps just the mental load of otherwise not of feeling like, goodness, like, I'm so excited about the pace that we're making, the traction they're making, just feedback from all sorts of like banks and fintechs and so forth. That's exciting, but also the road to get to exit is still long. But when I think about, but Winston, it's August right now, or it's about to be September. What do you need to do in the month of September, to make customers, team, investors, and so forth happy and seeing that momentum? And the answer is, like I said, is usually much simpler and more obvious, and that helps with stress.
Thank you. That was, I don't know, almost an hour. Well, that did not feel like almost an hour, but
Sorry
thank
about
you
that.
very much. I appreciate it. And I mean, obviously, we're very happy to see your trajectory and you constantly like growing. And congratulations on that thing we can't talk about now.
Sure.
But yeah, we wish you all the best, and I hope that this, which is the intent of this, can speak to one or two founders and make them feel like maybe it's not just you. And if you see any other person going through it outside and they look like everything is going okay, no, there's a lot of things going on inside. But thank you so much, appreciate it, and have a good rest of your day. I'll speak to you later.
Thank you, Vanessa. It was a pleasure. Talk soon.
Bye bye.